Throughout all of history, there have been claims that some people are simply different. Depending on your time period or where you're from, you might be considered a witch, a prophet, a revolutionary, or a person suffering from extreme mental illness. In society's eyes, everything is subjective. Depending on how people view you, they might take your word as law or see it as nothing more than mindless rambling. But some people stand by their stories until the very end. My name is Brienne, and I'm the host and creator of Among the Dirt and Trees, a show where we explore true crime cases that occur out in nature. In today's episode, we're going to discuss La Isla de las Muñecas, the Island of the Dolls, and the bizarre death behind its name. In order to understand La Isla de las Muñecas, we must discuss the man who's responsible for creating the reputation that would give it its namesake. This man was named Don Julian Santana Barrera. According to the stories about him, he lived a kind of complicated life. At some point, he found his way into religion, like many do, and it sounds like he went a little over the top with it. He became obsessed with the Bible and started hassling his neighbors. Eventually, he left his family behind and went to stay on a nearby island. These islands are often used to grow crops in shallow lakes around Mexico. In this case, Don Julian's island was on Tishuilo Lake. The family that he left behind believes that he wasn't completely sound mentally, so they often brushed off what he said, but not everyone does. One day, something disturbing happened. While he was learning all about his new island, he saw something horrifying in the canal: the body of a young girl. He believed that the little girl drowned in the lake and that this was a truly terrible thing, like anyone would. To add insult to injury, she wasn't the only arrival in the canal. A few moments later, a small doll came floating down too. The man scooped up the doll, believing it to belong to the young girl. According to some stories, it was in this moment that he heard a little girl cry out for her doll. While we don't know if he heard the disembodied voice of the young girl, we do know that he was set into action. He took the doll and tied her near a tree where the little girl was found. But from that moment on, he was a man possessed. Some stories say that Don Julian was haunted by the ghost of the young girl. Others say that he developed an unnatural fixation or maybe began to hallucinate. For the next 5 decades, Don Julian went around collecting dolls in all different states of disrepair and hanging them up all around the island. It was believed that he did this either to honor the loss of young life or to keep her ghostly form from trailing him around the island and disturbing the peace. In some versions of the story, he didn't put up the dolls at all. Instead, he found that they began to show up on their own over time, like the little girl was collecting them from nearby and hanging them up in trees to show them off. Regardless of his motivation, his tiny island became a local horror show covered in dolls. Now, I will be the first to admit that dolls, like aliens, are just not my jam. You can blame Goosebumps for that, but not only Goosebumps. For the rest of my life, I will say that the Disney Channel original movie Don't Look Under the Bed is the scariest movie that I've probably ever seen. I know that probably won't translate that well for adults in today's world, but a film about imaginary friends turning into boogeymen after they're abandoned is probably one of the scariest kid horror concepts that anyone has ever come up with. And the scene where the dolls watch her as she walks by had me kick out every doll in my room as a kid. So, I find an island of dolls to appease a little ghost girl fairly unsettling personally. Adding to the eeriness of it all, these are not just any dolls. The pictures of these dolls are more than a little disturbing. A lot of the dolls are badly mutilated, missing pieces and covered in cracks and other marks of destruction. As Don Julian went through his life, he always kept an eye out for abandoned dolls and brought them back as an offering to the little girl. I don't know how many dolls he put up in his lifetime, but I do know that some believe his efforts didn't work. In 2001, Don Julian was found dead. According to the rumors, his body was found in the exact spot where he found that little girl. So it is possible that after a lifetime of servitude, this little girl decided to kill him anyway. The mystery around this story really does just make it bizarre. Some versions claim that he was seeing a ghost, while others, including ones from his family, basically say that he was extremely mentally ill and was completely out of touch with reality. Some versions say that Don Julian drowned in that exact spot. Others say that he died of a heart attack while he was there. And when you look at that one, it isn't too hard to ask yourself if he possibly died of fright. What makes this all the more interesting is the little girl herself. His family doesn't believe the little girl is real at all. They believe that he hallucinated her and became fixated on the idea of this drowned girl. Many stories say that the drowned girl was there, but even that feels a little iffy to me. If we go with the version of the story where there was a little girl and she was, in fact, a spirit that haunted him, you have to ask yourself why, right? Though there are plenty of stories about children dying in haunting areas, hauntings of this caliber are often reserved for ghosts who died fairly grisly deaths. It makes me wonder if the little girl really drowned at all, or if she was drowned and then let loose to float up a canal with her favorite doll. And if we're already going to run with that version of the story, the next obvious question is, why did she haunt Don Julian specifically? Was it because he was just there? Or is it possible that this man had something to do with her death and he got away with it because no one ever believed him? Was it possible that he was actually bringing her dolls to entertain her and not appease her? Obviously, there is no evidence to support any of this, and I'm not saying that's what happened. With stories that are as much rumors as they are actual true tales, I think there's just this infinite air of mystery that will always surround them. Regardless of how interesting this story is and how disturbing those images might be to us, I think we do have to remember that no matter how you tell this tale, it's really very sad. Whether we are talking about a kind man's devotion to a fallen child, or a man's singularly focused descent into madness, Don Julian's story isn't a happy one. But since the majority of it is rumors anyway, maybe we go with a happy version. Maybe Don Julian didn't find these dolls out of fear or to make up for something, but rather to show a lost little girl that she would always be remembered. If that little girl was real, then Don Julian has done an excellent job of making sure that her story has lived on for years, even though she couldn't. And I think there's a beauty in that. So, if you want to discuss creepy ghost stories, unusual collections, or tales that seem dark on the surface but might still have some beauty underneath, feel free to contact me on Twitter or Instagram using the tag @datpod. Thanks, guys.